morning. That is God bless you. It must be the Rules Chairman's cologne that got you. Oh, he doesn't wear cologne. The hour of convening has arrived, and the Senate will now come to order. I'd ask that all unauthorized persons exit our beautiful chamber. Chair would like to recognize the well-dressed, is that a new tie?
Built cartoon on it.
Okay. I'd like to recognize the Rules Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's a wonderful day at our Capitol. It feels like Monday, but it's Tuesday. Thank you for your leadership, Mr. President. A couple of things in history. First, in 1821, the Spanish sold eastern Florida to the United States for $5 million. Well, that was overpriced. And the senator from the 7th told me today is his favorite day, National Margarita Day, and I hear he likes salt around the rim. Mr. President, the journal's been read and found to be correct.
It seems odd that National Margarita Day would be on a Tuesday. That seems counterproductive. Sounds great. Is there objection with dispensing of the reading of the journal? The chair hears none, and the reading of the journal is dispensed with. Is there objection to the confirmation of the journal? The chair hears none, and the journal is confirmed. All senators who have bills and resolutions, please bring them to the secretary's desk at this time. Mr. Secretary, first reading a reference of Senate bills and resolutions, please.
Senate Bill 530 by Senator Jackson of the 2nd, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Chapter 2 of Title 20 of the Official Code of Georgia annotated relating to elementary and secondary education so as to provide for limitations on waiver and variance
Education and youth.
Senate Bill 531 by Senators Jackson of the 2nd and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Chapter 1 of Title 22 of the Official Code of Georgia annotated relating to general provisions regarding eminent domain so as to provide for an alternative process.
Judiciary.
Senate Bill 532 by Senators Jones of the 25th and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Chapter 1 of Title 33 of the OCGA relating to general provisions for insurance so as to
Insurance and labor.
Senate Bill 533 by Senators Brass of the 28th and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Code Section 50-18-72 of the Official Code of Georgia annotated relating to when public disclosure not required.
Judiciary.
Senate Bill 534 by Senators Kennedy of the 18th and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Title 50 of the Official Code of Georgia annotated relating to state government so as to provide certain procedural requirements.
Government oversight.
Senate Bill 535 by Senator Summers of the 13th and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Title 50 of the Official Code of Georgia annotated relating to state government so as to provide for targeted
Government oversight.
Senate Bill 536 by Senators Dixon of the 45th and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Article 3 of Chapter 27 of Title 50 of the Official Code of Georgia annotated relating to bona fide coin-operated amusement machines.
Regulated industries.
Senate Bill 537 by Senators Jones the 2nd of the 22nd and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Title 2 of the Official Code of Georgia annotated relating to agriculture so as to enact the Food and
Agriculture and Consumer Affairs.
Senate Bill 538 by Senators Harbin of the 16th and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Chapter 2 of Title 21 of the Official Code of Georgia annotated relating to elections and primaries generally so as to require certain fraud countermeasures on physical absentee ballots, to provide an exception, to provide for rulemaking.
Ethics.
Senate Resolution 525 by Senators Beach of the 21st and others, a resolution urging the Board of Regents of the University System of Georgia to ensure that no less than 85% of all yearly early action.
Rules.
Senate Resolution 528 by Senator Gooch of the 51st, a resolution recognizing Miss Edna Jo Mize and dedicating an intersection in her honor and for other purposes.
Transportation.
That completes the order, Mr. President. Secretary, will you please read reports of standing committees? Mr. President, the Senate Committee on Agriculture and Consumer Affairs has had under consideration the following legislation and has instructed me to report the same back to the Senate with the following recommendation. Senate Bill 481 do pass. Respectfully submitted, Senator Walker of the 20th District Chairman. Mr. President, the Senate Committee on Banking and Financial Institutions has had under consideration the following legislation and has instructed me to report the same back to the Senate with the following recommendation. Senate Bill 470 do pass by substitute. House Bill 891 do pass. House Bill 899 do pass. Respectfully submitted, Senator Brass of the 28th District Chairman. Mr. President, the Senate Committee on Government Oversight has had under consideration the following legislation and has instructed me to report the same back to the Senate with the following recommendation. Senate Resolution 37 do pass. Senate Bill 279 do pass. Senate Bill 337 do pass. Respectfully submitted, Senator Harbin of the 16th District Chairman. Mr. President, the Senate Committee on Public Safety has had under consideration the following legislation and has instructed me to report the same back to the Senate with the following recommendation. House Bill 275 do pass by substitute. Respectfully submitted, Senator Albers of the 56th District Chairman. Mr. President, the Senate Committee on State and Local Government Operations has had under consideration the following legislation and has instructed me to report the same back to the Senate with the following recommendation. Senate Bill 522 do pass. House Bill 1142 do pass. House Bill 1214 do pass. House Bill 1250 do pass. House Bill 1265 do pass. House Bill 1285 do pass. House Bill 1300 do pass. House Bill 1314 do pass. Respectfully submitted, Senator Anderson of the 24th District Chairman. That completes the order, Mr. President.
Mr. Secretary, will you please read bills and resolutions for the second time?
Senate Bill 359 by Senator Albers of the 56th and others, Safe and Secure Georgia Act, an act. Senate Bill 382 by Senator Robertson of the 29th and others, Child Molestation Misdemeanor Convictions for the offense of aggravated child molestation by raising the minimum age of victims from 13 to 14, revised provisions. Senate Bill 393 by Senator Dolezal of the 27th and others, Common Carrier Non-Discrimination Act, an act. Senate Bill 397 by Senator Goodman of the 8th and others, General Education Development Diplomas, update and replace terminology, state-approved high school equivalency diplomas, provide. Senate Bill 472 by Senator Kennedy of the 18th, Public Service Commission, description of the election districts for members, change. Senate Bill 479 by Senator Hatchett of the 50th and others, firearms by convicted felons and first offender probationers. Each firearm in the possession or attempted possession of certain offenders shall be charged as a separate offense, specify. Senate Bill 505 by Senator Robertson of the 29th and others, communications officers. 911 communications officers receive training in the delivery of high-quality telephone cardiopulmonary resuscitation, require. Senate Resolution 319 by Senator Gooch of the 51st and others, Electoral College, recognize. Senate Resolution 477 by Senator Mullis of the 53rd and others, Joint Georgia Music Heritage Study Committee, create. Senate Resolution 479 by Senator Brass of the 28th and others, Taiwan, relations with the United States and the state of Georgia, commend. Senate Resolution 504 by Senator Mullis of the 53rd and others, Native American tribes, recognize. House Bill 1028 by Representative Earhart of the 36th and others, Cobb County Board of Education, change description of districts. House Bill 1089 by Representative Smith of the 133rd and others, revenue and taxation, certain violations of registration requirements for motor vehicles operated by motor carriers, increased penalty. House Bill 1154 by Representative Carson of the 46th and others, Cobb County Board of Commissioners, change description of districts. That completes the order, Mr. President.
It's now time for a morning roll call. Are there any motions to excuse? The chair recognizes the senator from the 33rd.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning, y'all. I'll ask for unanimous consent to excuse the senator from the 37th, 38, and 35, sir, for business. 20, 28, I'm sorry, 12, I'm sorry, sir.
Let me get this straight here. Without objection, the senators from the 37th, 38th, 35th, and 12th.
Yes, sir.
Are
For business
excused.
inside the Capitol.
Chair
Yes, sir.
recognizes the senator from the 31st.
Good morning, Mr. President. I ask for unanimous consent to excuse the senator from the 54th.
Without objection, the senator from the 54th is excused. Chair recognizes the senator from the 20th.
Thank you, Mr. President. I ask for unanimous consent to excuse the senator from the 53rd, business inside the Capitol.
Without objection, the senator from the 53rd is excused. Are there any additional motions to excuse? The chair sees none. The secretary will call the roll of senators. Signify your presence by voting the yea switch. The secretary will unlock the machine. It's now time for a morning devotional, and I'd ask that all senators please take your seats. Cease all audible conversations. And ask that our doorkeepers secure the chamber at this time. I'd like to recognize the senator from the 14th to lead us in our Pledge of Allegiance and to introduce to us our chaplain of the day.
Thank you. If you join me in honoring our flag, I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
and now our Georgia flag.
I pledge allegiance to the Georgia flag and to the principles for which it stands, with wisdom, justice, moderation.
Morning, Senators. Our guest speaker today is Kyle Clayton, the senior pastor at Grace Baptist Church in Cartersville. Kyle graduated from Cleveland High School in Cleveland, Tennessee, where he earned a baseball scholarship to Kennesaw State University, where, as an owl, he pitched all 4 years on the way to earning his Bachelor of Science degree in history education. In 2011, he graduated from KSU and immediately began his teaching and coaching career at Cass High School. Although he loved teaching U.S. history and AP world history, his passion has been and continues to be coaching baseball, softball, and volleyball. In June of 2016, Kyle left teaching to accept a new role, coaching in a capacity as a student minister at Cartersville First Baptist. After nearly 5 years in that role, Pastor Clayton now serves as a senior pastor at Grace Baptist Church, where he will continue to use his teaching and coaching skills to serve the parents, students, and family in the Bartow County community. Kyle is married to Sarah Beth Clayton, a fourth grade teacher at Cloverleaf Elementary School in Bartow County, and they have a 6-year-old son, Wyatt, and a 2-year-old daughter named Hayes. Anyone that knows Kyle knows that he has suffered from a lifelong and seemingly uncurable disease. You see, during the national championship of the 2020 season, we were convinced the Braves were going to the World Series. So me and 3 other pastors, including him, bought our tickets and booked our flights to Globe Stadium in Texas. Unfortunately, we all know now what happened, and they came up short and losing to the Dodgers 3-1. I never realized that Kyle had this condition until we were at the stadium. And he began rattling off stats. Not just one stat, not 2, but he knew the stats of every stinking player that was in the uniform. He continued on and on and on and on until we were in our seats. Once we were in our seats, Kyle knew where they were drafted from, their batting average, literally everything there was to know about them, including family members. He has baseball-itis. I am convinced that if he was a major league coach, he'd take up the mantle where my friend Bobby Cox left behind, kicking a home plate after a bad call. Not really, but maybe. With our beloved Braves winning the World Series this year, I'm convinced that Pastor Kyle is beginning to control his emotions at games and settle in at his new role, leading people and loving a community. Please welcome Kyle Clayton today.
Thank you, Senator. Right now, he mentioned that the only stat that truly matters is 2021 World Series champs. Is that right? Amen. Okay, good deal. Now, enough baseball talk. It had already been going around Cartersville just how much baseball I would speak, but not too much today. On February the 22nd, I think it's only courteous of us and mindful of us that we recognize George Washington's 290th birthday. So according to the Mount Vernon organization, a story on George Washington goes something like this. On March the 15th of 1783, the officers under George Washington's commands met to discuss a petition that called for them to mutiny due to Congress's failure to provide them back pay and pensions for their service during the American Revolution. George Washington addressed the officers with a 9-page speech. We're not reading that speech today. This speech sympathized with their demands but denounced their methods by which they proposed to achieve them. Before he started his speech, he unfolded the letter that he had with him. He took out his spectacles and he addressed the crowd and said, "Gentlemen, you will permit me to put on my spectacles, for I have grown not only gray, but almost blind in the service of my country." By 1783, George Washington was already well advanced in age for his time and also his experiences, and yet this was still before he would serve his 2 terms as President of the United States. The purpose of this statement that he made, even prior to his letter being put down in the thoughts of a mutiny, he so humbly showed the sacrifices that he himself had made for the service of his still very young country. I look around this room, and I notice the years. I notice the spectacles, the gray hair. Some of you have even lost hair, right, Senator Thompson? Yeah, okay, just making sure. It is not lost on me as a 34-year-old the amount of time and the sacrifice that has gone on in this room as you serve our great state and also our nation. I'm thankful for me and my family, for me and my wife. We're thankful for the work that you do now. I've got 2 current Georgians living in my house that are going to be the future politicians and servants of this state. So on behalf of Wyatt and Hayes, I thank you. But as you well know, it's not lost on you that the things that you deliberate over, the things that you vote on now, will also make an impact on the generations to come, especially the unborn, those that we don't know. No doubt about it. Your impact is important. Your work is cut out for you. And I have no right whatsoever to come in here and try to impart wisdom upon you. But instead, all I can provide you is a couple pieces of advice of where I get wisdom, and that is through the Holy Scripture. So 3 quick things that I want to share with you to encourage you in the work that you do. The first one being quite simply, seek wisdom. To seek wisdom is to love God, because God is the giver of all wisdom. Every single person that is living and breathing in this room knows the difference between what's right and what's wrong. Nobody would debate that, but we must keep in mind that wisdom is knowing what's right and then, in fact, doing what is right. The difference, unfortunately, at times can be lost on all of us, but seeking wisdom from God is also how we show love to God. So how do we go about acquiring this wisdom that we seek from the Lord? This is where I look to Scripture. I look to the smartest man that ever lived. The king named Solomon says this in Proverbs 1:5, "Let a wise person listen and increase in his discernment." Couple that with James 1:19. James says, "My dear brothers and sisters, understand this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to anger." On a daily basis, as leaders, myself included, we have voices and opinions, and you especially have one of the highest platforms within the state of Georgia. But I would encourage you that just because we have these platforms doesn't always mean that we use them to promote our own thoughts and opinions. This is just as much an opportunity for us to take to listen to the people that we represent. And I encourage you to do so and becoming wiser in the process because we listen. Secondly, the Apostle Paul in his letter to the church at Philippi showed the importance of serving others, which you know so well. This is what Paul says in Philippians 2, verses 3 and 4. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility consider others as more important than yourselves. Everyone should look out not only for his own interest, but also for the interests of others. Just as General Washington humbly referenced his own service to his own nation, I would encourage you to simply, humbly serve well. Not only your constituents, not only looking out for your own self-interest, without deceit, without selfishness, but also you have the opportunity to look out for the needs of others. Obviously, George Washington, while important, while such a stronghold of our nation, he is imperfect as an example because he was a man. Is there someone better? Is there someone that perfectly exemplifies these traits that we just read about? Well, I certainly believe so. As a follower of Jesus Christ, I believe that Jesus fits these characteristics perfectly. And as Paul continues in his letter to the church at Philippi, he says, adopt the same attitude as that of Christ Jesus, who, existing in the form of God, did not consider equality with God as something to be exploited. Instead, he emptied himself by assuming the form of a servant, taking on the likeness of humanity. And when he had come as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even to death on a cross. Christ, as God, put on the restrictions of the world to serve others perfectly, even to death, for the sins of mankind. As we are to strive to serve others, we are even to serve our enemies in this way. How did Jesus serve his enemies? He was even put to death for them so that they might live. Why did Jesus Christ follow through with this plan of salvation for mankind? He wanted to show grace to humanity. Specifically, through the grace of God, finishing out that stanza, for this reason God highly exalted him and gave him the name that is above every name, so that at the name of Jesus every knee will bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. Christ performed the task, became nothing, so that God could be glorified through his grace that he showed to us. The giving of something that isn't deserved. In a world and a country that so oftentimes seems to be coming apart at the seams, I pray that our leaders, myself included as a spiritual leader, I pray that we are known by our grace. The giving that isn't deserved to others, because we have received this grace from our Lord Jesus Christ. In summary, if you are ever in the Cartersville area and you're our guest at Grace Baptist Church, I guarantee you, at the end of every service, you will hear the 3 pieces of advice that I gave to you today, the 3 pieces that I teach our church, that I teach to myself as we say them. We strive to love God, seeking wisdom by listening to him and his word, serve others, not for our own benefit, but for the benefit of someone else, and show grace. Be willing to give that which isn't deserved. Thank you again for your time. It is an honor and a privilege. May God bless you. May God bless our state of Georgia, the United States, and lastly, go Braves. Let's pray together. Father God in heaven, we love you. We are thankful for this opportunity that you give us, because as another day is given, your grace is made known to us. Father, we can do nothing to repay this grace. The only thing we can do is surrender. Lord, as these servants here in the state of Georgia aim to serve those around us, we pray, Lord, for your wisdom. We pray for the opportunity to serve others rightfully. And we also pray, Lord, for opportunities to show grace. God, all of these things come from you. Nothing can be done apart from you. We honor and worship you today. In the name of Jesus, I pray all things. Amen. Thank you.
Are there any unanimous consents? Does any senator wish to rise on a point of personal privilege? Chair recognizes the minority leader for a point of personal privilege.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, everyone. Just before we began session this morning, Democratic senators and representatives Democratic senators and representatives from several of our largest counties held a press conference to say enough is enough on Republican attempts to override the local redistricting process. When we talk about voting rights in this chamber, we talk about gerrymandering. We are fighting an old fight. The GOP efforts to disenfranchise voters in Georgia is nothing new. But this year, my colleagues across the aisle have brought a new weapon to an old fight. They are using the local redistricting process, which has historically been left up to local delegations, to completely override the will of voters in some of our populous and diverse counties. They are defying precedent and local control to weaponize redistricting at the county level. They want to reinsert themselves. They want to reinsert themselves on county commissions and school boards, despite the fact that voters have said no. Most voters in Georgia aren't aware of the process and don't understand what is happening to them, while Republican legislators are stripping away the power of their duly elected representatives. This is a personal and extreme form of voter suppression, where at times they even appear to be targeting specific candidates who haven't been elected yet. And why? Because they can't afford accountability. Accountability is forcing them out of office, so they are changing the rules to try to retain power. Some Republicans will cry out, but this is our right to draw these lines. Your rights also come with responsibilities to the people of the state, as well as your colleagues in this chamber. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the well.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 28th for a point of personal privilege.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise today to wish everyone a happy Self-Direction Day. Today is exactly that, and so you're probably wondering, or you might be wondering, what self-direction is. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about it. So self-direction is an optional model of home and community-based services or service delivery that enables individuals of all ages with all types of disabilities to maintain their independence at home in their local community. When an individual chooses to self-direct, they decide how, when, and from whom their services and paid supports will be delivered. Self-direction gives individuals the freedom of choice and self-determination about their services and supports to live independently in their own homes and their own communities. So the central goal of self-direction is to maximize an individual's opportunities to live independently in the most integrated, community-based setting of his or her choice. And so We've got members of this organization with us today in the gallery, so if y'all would please give them a welcome from our Georgia State Senate. Thank y'all for being here. And I want to thank Nikki Klein for her leadership in helping set this up. And they are actually down in 125 of the Capitol. They've got some food down there. Y'all please come down there to see them. And then we're also going to be doing a picture down on the second floor at the steps. So if I'm not sure which ones yet. We'll either be the north or the south. So please join us for the picture. And again, happy Self-Direction Day. Thank you.
Chair recognizes our distinguished rules chairman for a point of personal privilege.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Mr. President. I here stand before you today from years of being here and understanding the process. Every year I write my local elected officials, my county commissioners and city council members and mayors, and occasionally some of my school boards that are active in wanting local legislation. And in my letter to them, I explain my policy. And my policy is if they give me something like a city to change their charter, I can and have the right to change it according to how I want it too. Because they can't do it unless they have the legislature's support. So when I hear everybody talk about, oh, it's local control, well, it is local control. But we have a say also because it can't be done unless we do it. So if my counties or cities give me something, I have a right to adjust it how I see it too. And I actually tell my folks that I'm going to if I see a need to adjust it. I have a 30,000-foot view of some which they don't have that. They're dealing with local issues, and I respect that, and I recognize that. However, I, as a legislator, have the right to adjust it according to I see fit too, and my House members. So I just wanted to let you know that's actually what it should happen. You should have the higher authority to adjust it your way. Sometimes theirs is political fighting, and sometimes ours is political fighting. But regardless, as a state senator here in this chamber, doing local legislation, we have a choice to adjust it how we see fit too. Mr. President, through years of experience in doing that very thing, I tell you today it is acceptable, okay, and you should take a lead on maps, on local legislation when it comes to charters or ordinances that we feel that they need to do. Mr. Chairman, Mr. President, I yield the will.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 6th for a point of personal privilege.
Thank you, Mr. President. Today is the last day that my daughter, Koki, will be 12. Tomorrow, she will officially say goodbye to childhood and become a teenager. And I just wanted to take a moment to tell her how proud I am of her and how much she is loved. I am not perfect and have made many mistakes. I wish I were more patient, less worried, more present. I wish I could take back all the moments I was stressed with work, with life, with politics, with y'all. And pause just for a second to hug her. But all those moments, the good, the bad, the in-between, they have shaped her and made her who she is. I want her to know that I am her biggest fan and most ardent defender. And I look at her and I see myself in so many ways. Only she is the better version of me. More confident, fearless, and caring. Tomorrow, we will celebrate. But today I say, happy birthday to my sweet, strong girl. I yield the will.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 7th for a point of personal privilege.
Good morning, colleagues. I know the senator from the 53rd normally gives me a hard time about my red jackets, but today is Blue and Gold Day at the Capitol. We have a lot of blue and gold jackets running around. You'll see a lot of our FFA students from across the state here today, and I have a couple from Berrien County that are in the gallery if they want to stand up, and I think there's a few other blue and gold jackets in the gallery with them. So y'all help me welcome some FFA students to the state capitol today. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the will.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 9th for a point of personal privilege.
Good morning, colleagues. I just wanted to take a minute and respond to the local control issue that our rules chair brought up. The thing that makes this different is, and this was laid out beautifully by one of our House members, Representative Stacey Evans over there during her floor speech. The difference here is, if I sit here every day representing my district, and I'm voting on bills that they don't like, don't agree with, it doesn't align with their values, they can vote me out. The problem with these local control bills that we're seeing, the power is not being given to our local delegation that was duly elected by the people in that county. So when we move past our local delegation, and those of us who are elected to represent that delegation, to represent our people in that district, and we move it to the floor, you've taken the power away from that voter. They can't vote you out. They can't vote out the senator from the 1st, senator from the 15th, not they would, senator from the 23rd, senator from the 16th. I'm just giving examples. I'm not pinpointing anybody in particular. They can't vote you out. So we have removed their power and their voice to make this decision that they entrusted us, the local delegation, to do. And this is why it's different. I yield the will.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 56th for a point of personal privilege.
Thank you, Mr. President. Tomorrow must be a good day, although we're not in session. It is my 29th wedding anniversary with my beautiful bride, Carrie. Last year was, without question, the most challenging year of our lives between politics, business, and health with my son. And she is my rock, and she helped guide our family through a very challenging time, and I'm so blessed to have her for this last 29 years, and God willing, for 29 more to come. Thank you.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 31st for a point of personal privilege.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just wanted to let everybody know that a friend of ours in Polk County, the former Polk County GOP chairman yesterday, passed away, Mark Wall, and just wanted to offer condolences and prayers to his family during this time this week. Just ask that you pray over his family this week during your prayer time, and think about the folks in Polk County today. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Chair recognizes the pro tem for a point of personal privilege.
Thank you, Mr. President. I don't know if the folks from the Georgia Restaurant Association are still here. If you are in the gallery, raise your hands. I don't believe they're still here at the moment. But I wanted to make sure that all the members were aware that the members and the staff are invited to the Taste of Georgia today. And it's actually tomorrow. They're extending the invitation today. It is tomorrow afternoon at 5 p.m. at the Freight Depot. And if you haven't been to this, you need to go. You'll really enjoy it. Restaurants from all over the state come in, they spend time, they tell you about their industry, about their food, about their different dishes, and it's a great time to work with these folks and to get to know them. You know, the restaurant industry is surviving, but I don't know of any industry that got hit harder than the hospitality industry and the healthcare industry. I mean, they literally lost tens of thousands of jobs here in Georgia, and they still suffer with supply chain issues. They still suffer with finding workers. And we think about the restaurant industry and what it provides for young people, particularly people of all ages, but many of us had our first jobs in the restaurant industry. Many of us had our first introduction to business in the restaurant industry. Many of us learned personal skills and work ethic from the restaurant industry. And this industry is vital to our state, to our economy, to our health, our well-being, and our quality of life. When people travel, I mean, my friend from the 15th, if he goes to New Orleans, he comes home and guess what he says? Oh, I had the greatest gumbo down there. He comes home and he talks about where he ate, the experience, how he was treated. And that's where we get a lot of the feeling and the ambiance in our community, in our city, and in our state. This is a vitally important industry. The restaurant industry is key to our success and growth. And the restaurant industry lost nearly 15% of all the businesses during the pandemic. They closed permanently. And we expect it to even be greater over the next few months. So as we visit with our folks, our friends from the Georgia restaurant industry tomorrow, 5 p.m. at the Freight Depot, Wednesday, February 23rd, tomorrow, 5 p.m. at the Freight Depot. I know you'll enjoy it, and I want to extend a personal invitation. They will all be there, and they'll be excited to see you. Thank you, Mr. President. I'll yield the well.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 33rd with a point of personal privilege.
Thank you, Mr. President, my fellow senators, colleagues, friends, and y'all. Today is our Black History Moment. Lo Jelks was Atlanta's first black television reporter. Monica Press Kaufman Pearson was at a meeting near downtown Atlanta shortly after her arrival in 1975. As an anchor for WSB-TV, when someone there mentioned a name, she says he always paved the way for her with his landmark career. Lorenzo Lo Jelks, she soon learned, was hired at the station in 1967, becoming the first black television reporter in Atlanta, hot Atlanta. He opened the door for us. He's my hero, Pearson, who would say, who worked at the station for 37 years. Jelks is humble about his role in Atlanta's television history. His transition to television wasn't easy. The station initially didn't show Jelks' face on the air, fearing a backlash from some white viewers. And the viewers only saw Lorenzo Jelks reporting in white letters in the middle of the black TV screen. I didn't complain about it because I didn't have control over it, he said. Jelks' journey to Atlanta began in St. Petersburg, Florida, where he grew up. Like many broadcast reporters on that time, he started in radio. In 1955, Jelks ran a weekly music show on a local radio station as a high school student. He graduated from Clark College, now Clark Atlanta University, in 1961, and was the operations manager at WIGO-AM, an R&B radio station in Atlanta, when he got the call from WSB-TV. They told him that he will become the first Negro TV newsman in Atlanta. His hometown paper, now called the Tampa Bay Times, reported it in the June 5th, 1967 edition. His first day at work was on June 12th. Excuse me. News outlets were under unprecedented pressure to hire black reporters at the time. President Lyndon Johnson that summer commissioned a report in the wake of riots in several large cities that concluded that the news media generally failed to report adequately on the causes and consequences of civil disorder and on the underlying problem of race relations. The report recommended including and recruiting and retraining more black reporters. WSB managers told Jelks they hired him in part because the station needed a black reporter. Station officials insisted he would not solely cover news impacting the black community, but news across the city. Jelks understood the significance of his position, and he would arrive early at work before the other reporters to read the newspaper to familiarize himself with the day's top stories. Jelks traveled to other cities with mass transit systems for reports on Atlanta plans for what would eventually become Martyr. He also interviewed Jimmy Carter during his 1970 gubernatorial run, and for many, his most memorable assignment was interviewing Ku Klux Klan leaders before they had a rally at Stone Mountain. Other Atlanta news outlets began hiring black reporters. Atlanta Journal hired its first black reporter, Harmon Perry, in 1968, Billy Suber Aaron, Joycelyn Dorsey, Emmanuel Hall, Felicia Jeter, and Ron Saylor Sr. became familiar faces across Atlanta's television screens in the subsequent years following Jelks. Jelks worked at the station until 1976. He returned to his first love, radio, despite offers to become an anchor at stations and to report also for NBC News. He started a radio station, WAUC AM, developing projects such as Campus Spotlight, which highlighted life and education on historically black colleges and universities nationwide. Jelks also founded the AUC Digest, a newspaper serving the Atlanta University Center, which he still publishes. And that is your Black History Moment. Mr. President, I yield the well.
Thank you, Senator. The chair recognizes the senator from the 40th for a point of personal privilege.
Thank you, Mr. President, my colleagues in the Senate. I rise this morning because the governor has proclaimed February as the Spay, Neuter Awareness Month and February 22nd as World Spay Day. I'm going to tell you a little story, and it's G-rated, about why this is important. Almost 2 years ago, my sister, just like many of us, found herself having to convert her home to an office. Now, she worked for a nonprofit that did after-school care. So she also had to re-engineer that entire nonprofit because they made their money by taking care of kids after school, and there were no kids in school. So she attended a lot of Zoom meetings, hours and hours of Zoom meetings during this time. I'm so proud of my sister because in that re-engineering, she found a way to meet the new need, which was to take care of the kids of our first responders and to open a tutoring center in a school that had been closed down so that parents or kids who have parents who had to go to work could go to a school building and get tutored. I'm just so proud of her. She was one of the pandemic heroes. Now here's where the story gets a little more complicated though. She also had her teenage daughter at home with her, who was attending high school on a computer. The school, her high school was a block away, but was either empty or only half full of children. Now, can you picture this? Can you picture this mama with her teenage daughter stuck at home hours and hours of the day? Suffice it to say, they got a little tired of each other, right? Okay, so what did they do? They adopted a kitten. And their lives became more fun and more jovial, and it gave them something to focus on, and it lowered the stress, and it helped their relationship during this very hard time. This is the role of companion animals. They're so important. But the flip side of this story is that during that same time, many people lost their jobs and their ability to keep their homes, which meant they couldn't keep their pets, which meant all these pets had to go to rescue centers and get adopted. Well, we all know what happens when there are too many pets at the adoption center, and that's a very sad part of the story. So today, the members of this body recognize February 22nd, 2022 as World Spay Day and urge all pet lovers to spay or neuter their companion animals and or donate to their local animal shelters, rescue groups, and spay and neuter organizations to help community members spay or neuter their pets. So thank you also to all the hardworking staff and volunteers at Georgia's animal shelters, rescue groups, and spay neuter organizations so that these facilities can stay open and do the important work that they do. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the well.
You have a consent calendar of privilege resolutions before you. Does any senator wish to remove a resolution from the consent calendar? Is there objection to adoption of the resolutions on the consent calendar? The chair hears none, and the resolutions on the consent calendar are adopted. Are there any motions to withdraw and commit? You have a consent calendar of local bills before you. Mr. Secretary, are there any objections filed to any bills on the local consent calendar?
Mr. President, there are no objections filed.
Is there objection to agreeing to the report of the Committee on State and Local Government, which is favorable to the passage of the bills on the local consent calendar? The chair hears none, and the report of the committee is agreed to. The questions on the passage of the bills on the local consent calendar. All those in favor vote yea. Opposed, nay. The Secretary will unlock the machine. On the passage of the bills on the local consent calendar, the yeas are 54, the nays are 0, and the bills having received the requisite constitutional majority are therefore passed. Chair recognizes the majority leader.
Mr. President, I ask for unanimous consent that the bills that were passed on the local consent calendar be immediately transmitted to the House.
I'm not sure what's going on there. The majority leader has asked for unanimous consent that the bills that were just passed on the local consent calendar be immediately transmitted to the House. Is there objection? The chair hears none, and they are immediately transmitted. We are now going to move on to the rules calendar. Mr. Secretary, can you please read the caption of Senate Bill 395?
Senate Bill 395 by Senator Hatchett of the 50th, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Code Section 15-6-2 of the OCGA relating to the number of judges of superior courts so as to provide a third judge of the superior courts of the Mountain Judicial Circuit, to provide for the appointment of such additional judge by the governor and for other purposes. Mr. President, the Senate Committee on Judiciary recommends this bill do pass. Respectfully submitted, Senator Strickland of the 17th District Chairman. That completes the order.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 50th to present the measure.
Thank you, Mr. President. Today I rise to bring Senate Bill 395. This is a bill to add an additional Superior Court judge to the Mountain Judicial Circuit, which is in Northeast Georgia. This is based on the Judicial Workload Assessment Committee's recommendation as to circuits that are in need of additional judges. Right now there are 8 circuits out of the 50 in the state of Georgia in which the Judicial Workload Assessment Committee is recommending a new judge. Right now, the Mountain Judicial Circuit is listed as number 3, and this bill will help follow that recommendation and get a 3rd judge to the Mountain Judicial Circuit. If there's any questions, I'll happy to yield.
You have no questions.
Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the will.
Does any other senator wish to speak for or against Senate Bill 395? The chair sees none. Is there objection to agreeing the report of the committee which is favorable to the passage of the bill? The chair hears none. The report of the committee is agreed to. Is there objection to the main question being ordered? The chair hears none and the main question is ordered. Questions on the passage of the bill? All those in favor vote yea. Opposed nay. The secretary will unlock the machine. On the passage of the bill, the yeas are 51, the nays are 1. This bill, having received the requisite constitutional majority, is therefore passed.
I've always wanted to be standing up here when you do that and me jump back and grab my finger like I did.
Mr. Secretary, can you please read the caption to Senate Bill 449?
Senate Bill 449 by Senator Dixon of the 45th and others. A bill to be entitled an act to amend Part 5 of Article 16 of Chapter 2 of Title 20 of the OCGA relating to review and removal of students in elementary and secondary education so as to provide for the protection of the fundamental right of parents to direct the upbringing and education of their minor children from undue infringement by a state or local government entity and for other purposes. Mr. President, the Senate Committee on Education and Youth recommends this bill do pass by substitute. Respectfully submitted, Senator Payne of the 54th District Chairman. Mr. President, the Senate Committee on Education and Youth offers the following substitute to Senate Bill 449. A bill to be entitled an act to amend Part 5 of Article 16 of Chapter 2 of the Title 20 of the Official Code of Georgia Annotated relating to review of removal of students in elementary and secondary education so as to provide for the protection of the fundamental right of parents to direct the upbringing and education of their minor children from undue infringement by a state or local government entity, local board of education, or other governing body, and for other purposes. That completes the order, Mr. President.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 45th to speak to Senate Bill 449.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate colleagues, I bring before you Senate Bill 449. It's a Parents' Bill of Rights, and it's a governor's bill. And as a parent of 3 children in public schools and a believer of the beneficial impact of public education, the governor and I believe parents and the school system need to work together instead of against each other. It's time to reaffirm the rights of parents to direct the education and upbringing of their own children and have the support of local school districts in doing so. This bill was drafted with teachers, parents, and leaders in education around the state. It lays out the right of every parent and the role of each school district must play in upholding these rights. This bill also codifies the best practices for school districts while maintaining local control. This legislation ensures parents have the right to see material, curriculum, and other education material that pertains to their child and what they're learning. Colleagues, what this bill simply does is it's a transparency bill, and it gives parents the right to review the material, the primary material that their children are going to be taught the first 2 weeks of every 9-week grading period. It also allows parents to opt their child out of any videograph or photograph, but it does exclude any type of security footage, like if there's footage on a bus or in the school for security, they can't opt out of that. And it also allows parents to opt their child out of sex education. It also, what it does is it lays out a timetable. If the parents have questions on material, the principal has 3 days to respond to that. If the principal of their school system can't respond within 3 days, they can set up a timetable with information for the parent, and they have 30 days to do that. From that, the parent can appeal to the state or to the local school board, and the school board must put that on their next calendar business meeting. And if the parent doesn't get the response they're looking for at the local level, they can appeal to the state school board as well. And this bill is a win-win for students, parents, teachers across the state. And with that, Mr. President, be happy to answer any questions. If there are no questions, I'll yield the well.
You have a question. The chair recognizes the senator from the 26th with a question.
Will the senator yield?
Yes, sir.
What is the basis for this bill? It seems it has some underlying things in it. So is this the governor of Virginia's bill?
Well, no, it's the governors of Georgia's bill. And there's no underlying. It's a transparency bill. It's simply...
You say it's transparency. Sex education taught in schools. These young kids need to understand what the responsibility is when you do what you're not supposed to do, and what the realities of life are. If you're teaching American history, you teach the whole history. Not just part of it, but you teach the whole history about how we arrived, how we've come through the trials and tribulations. So are you telling me that a parent now can dictate as to what is taught in the classroom?
Yeah, I believe that the parents have the fundamental right in deciding what their children are taught and the upbringing of their child. I do. I feel that's a fundamental right of parents. And if parents, if they want to teach their child sex ed, and they don't want to have them taught that in school, then that's the parent's right, in my opinion.
But when the kid gets in trouble, who's going to see about it? Who's going to see about, isn't it true? Somebody has to see about the kid when things don't go the right way. Kids are kids. As I look at it, even in high school, you got teenagers having babies. And they are babies themselves. And if mom and dad are up in age, who gonna deal with that teenager when mom and dad can't get in the streets and understand who their friends are and who they're hanging with?
Yeah, I understand your question, but with all due respect, I still believe that it's a parent's ultimate right on deciding what their child is taught.
It seems to me y'all have got on this big fix about CRT, which is something that y'all created.
Senator, please form those as questions from your desk.
Isn't it true that this bill basically is the governor of Virginia's bill?
That is not true.
Do you continue to yield?
Yes, sir. Mr.
Chair
President.
recognizes the senator from the 50th with a question.
Thank you, Mr. President. Does the senator yield?
Yes, I do.
Do school systems still have local control when creating the procedure listed in this bill?
Yes, they do. This bill was drafted in a way to allow for local control. The bill states that school systems must have procedures in place to uphold these rights, but it does allow for local control. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Senator.
Do you continue to yield?
Yes, sir, Mr. President.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 41st with a question.
Does the senator yield?
Yes, I do.
Senator, you stated that this is a win-win for parents, teachers, and the school district. Can you enumerate for us how this is a win-win for teachers?
Yeah, it's a win-win, for everyone involved. Everyone knows, their role within the school system, and it lays it out clearly. I believe it's a win-win for all parties involved.
Do you further yield?
Yes, ma'am.
Senator, is it not true that teachers who spoke in the committee and the organization that represents teachers opposed this bill?
I don't know if they oppose this bill, but I've heard from dozens of teachers. I actually spoke at a school Friday where I had over a half dozen teachers commending me on this bill.
Do you further yield?
Yes, ma'am.
Isn't it true that the curriculum for schools are set by our local school boards and not by individual teachers themselves?
Primary material is yes.
So, do you further yield?
Yes, ma'am.
Why does this bill put the onus on local principals to provide these materials as opposed to the school board and the school superintendent, who are the ones who actually create or oversee kind of that curriculum? Why is this having any impact on our local schools as opposed to going to the school district level?
This bill, laying it out this way, it's more efficient at the local level.
Can you reiterate? Can you further speak to how that's more efficient when you've just told me that it's the school boards who are responsible for laying out the curriculum for their entire school district?
It's more efficient for individual teachers to do so.
Do you yield for one last question?
Sure.
Would you consider it a reasonable approach to have school boards, the school district level, provide these materials to the parents upon request, as opposed to adding burdens to an already overburdened school system as it relates to their teachers and principals in classrooms?
I disagree with you. I don't think it's overburdensome.
Do you continue to yield?
Yes, sir, Mr. President.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 31st for a question.
The senator yield?
Yes, I do.
Senator, is it not true that whether you're a mom, dad, grandparent, or guardian, if you have a healthy relationship and you're involved in your kids' day-to-day in the classroom, a lot of the things that are in this bill is basically creating an opportunity for parents that if they don't have that same opportunity in communities?
Yes, I agree with you 100%.
You further yield?
Yes, I do.
Senator, isn't it not true that those same moms, dads, grandparents, and guardians are responsible for electing local school boards to carry out the wishes of the citizens of their local cities and counties across Georgia?
Yes, they do.
Senator, you yield for one more question?
I do.
Is it not true that at the end of the day, whether you're a mom, dad, guardian, grandparent, taking care of a child in this world, that you know what's best for that child in the home, in the classroom, on the streets, wherever that kid goes every single day before the government does?
Absolutely.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
Do you continue to yield?
Yes, one more question.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 10th with a question.
Thank you, Mr. President. Would the senator yield?
Yes, sir.
Senator, help me if you will. I notice over on page 3 that it talks about the rights, if you will. Can you tell me how a parent would exercise these rights?
Yes, I believe I alluded to that in my opening statement, you know, that they have the right to request information about materials to their principal or their school system. That principal or school system has 3 days to respond. If they're unable to do so or get that information, they would be required to lay out a timetable within a 30-day window to get that information. If they're unable to do so, the parent has the right to appeal to the local school board, which at that time the local school board would be required to put that on a calendar for their next business meeting. And then it also allows the parent to appeal to the state school board as well.
Senator Further Yield?
Yes.
Senator, are any of these rights new in your language, or these already rights that parents have to petition their school board?
It's not codified under state law currently. It's under board rule, which can be undone pretty easily. So this would codify those rights in state law.
So the school boards currently have the control of that process, is that correct?
That is, yes.
Do the school boards object to anything that's in this language?
I've not heard of any objections from any school boards.
Senator Further Yield?
Yes.
Senator, over on page 5 of your language, it talks about procedures. Can you show me in this legislation where those procedures are outlined?
Procedures for?
I'm looking at your language. You have procedures. You have several of them in here mentioned over
Yeah,
on page 5.
I've covered all that. I mean, I did state, you know, in my opening remarks that the parents had the right within the first 2 weeks of a grading period of a 9-week period to review that material. From that, you know, they can opt their child out of videograph, photograph. They can opt their child out of sex ed, and then I described the others. I think I covered that. With that, Mr. President, I yield the well. Thank you.
Senator has yielded the well. The chair recognizes the minority leader to speak to the measure. She waves. Chair recognizes your seatmate, the senator from the 42nd, to speak to the measure.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in opposition to Senate Bill 449. This legislation takes a process currently managed by our local school districts and duly elected local school boards that currently can be done in a way to promote engagement in our schools, to encourage conversations between teachers and parents, and to build school district community, and instead turns it adversarial. Parents across Georgia are invited to back-to-school nights and regular parent-teacher conferences. At any time, if a parent has a question about curriculum, they're encouraged to talk to their child's teachers or principal. They can get involved in the PTA, attend school board meetings, and many do. We have, importantly, a democratic process to influence school curriculum by electing school board members, and elections where those same individuals can be voted out if parents are dissatisfied with the way their local school district is conducting affairs. Instead of all this that we've had in place for decades and generations, this bill develops a formal process to demand information from schools and creates a process for investigations and appeals instead of the conversations and democratic process we have in place today. Here, we empower a massive surveillance and document production effort that contributes to an atmosphere of classroom censorship and overburdening of already burdened teachers. Tells them we don't trust them. The subject of the investigation are these very teachers. Let's let that sink in a minute. The teachers. The people who care so much for our children that many of them spend weekends and evenings revising lesson plans, who welcome us into their classrooms, send regular updates home, spend their own money on school supplies, and worry about the future of their students. Teachers who have been underpaid for decades, worked in underfunded schools for decades, and who have borne a disproportionate burden during the 2+ years of this pandemic. It is such a shame that we are willing to get so deep into manufactured crises and partisan politics that we're going after teachers. But this won't just hurt teachers. It will hurt our children and stifle their education. I've heard from dozens of teachers in the past weeks, and they describe the process of developing and revising lesson plans to best meet their students' needs. They steer children to materials based on their interests, to further engage them, to open up a love of learning, because research demonstrates that this student-directed learning improves outcomes. But now, teachers may be faced with complaints and a litigious process if they introduce a topic that even one parent disagrees with. This bill stifles this process, this love of learning that can be ignited, and it's possible all of our students could suffer. The claim was made in committee that this bill will only apply to board-approved curriculum materials and not supplemental materials. But teachers weave in supplemental materials to support curriculum standards, to keep materials current and engage their students, and none of us could be surprised if parents do not know which is which. This will cause confusion, and complaints will not be limited to board-approved curriculum materials. We actually witnessed the danger of this in committee, where one of the very few parents who came down here to support this legislation used a complaint about not board-approved curriculum materials, but about supplemental materials as her example for why she supported this legislation. We're opening up our schools to censorship and more risk, and our teachers. The ability for even one or a very small minority of parents to disrupt the flow of lesson planning, limit what teachers can teach, and stifle the education of every other student in that class or that school. That will have a chilling effect on education and does a disservice to every Georgian. Lastly, we need to discuss the fact that this is an unfunded mandate. After over a decade of underfunding our schools, not even at the early 80s QBE formula, this year we are funding it, but now we're adding expensive curriculum review and complaint processes. Who is going to handle the document requests, gathering all the documents, and also the appeals process? As an attorney, I understand how much work is involved in responding to document requests. We should be working together to support teachers who have been through so much in these past 2 years. Support teachers who, despite the low pay and the opprobrium cast upon them and ginned up, frankly, by members of this body for partisan political games, are still willing to be teachers. It's not really a surprise when faced by bills like this that we lose so many teachers within the first 5 years, that we have a teacher shortage that's headed quickly towards a major crisis, and that people, when weighing their careers, choose something else, and that many longtime teachers tell young people currently looking at careers and who are in college that no, they would not go into teaching today. We should support the community building our schools instead of trying to empower silly complaints to tear it apart. Thank you, Mr. President. I'll yield for questions, and if there are none, I will yield the well.
You have a question. The chair recognizes the minority leader with a question.
Can you move aside, please? Thank you, Mr. President. Senator, will you yield?
I do.
You have your bill with you.
I do.
On
I
page
do.
5, lines 104 and 105, there's a procedure for parents to object to instructional materials.
Yes, I see that. Mhm.
Are you concerned that this might result in a watering down of education materials and teachers make an effort to please the parents more?
Absolutely. And this comes in, ebbs and flows in whatever is on today's, partisan, political, culture war agenda that's ginned up by media, right? And then we're instead of saying, no, you know what? The education of our children is so important. We're feeding into these manufactured fears, and the problem with that is it will stifle education. It will stifle honest conversations. It will cause a generation of students less prepared to go out in public and work in the diverse communities that we have today. And it will cause us to be even more in a crisis of teacher work shortages. Because frankly, with the disrespect demonstrated to teachers by bills like this, why would you want to go into teaching?
Thank you, Senator. We want parents to be involved in their children's education, but you could have 5 parents in one day object to something that's being taught, and there goes the curriculum.
There goes the curriculum, and certainly there goes a lot of time and money spent dealing with it.
Do you continue to yield?
Thank you, Senator.
Chair recognizes the Appropriations Chairman to your left.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Yield.
Absolutely.
Senator, I'm just trying to understand your issue with the bill. I'm just trying to see if I can decipher it. And reading the pertinent points of the bill, do you think that parents have a right to direct the upbringing and moral or religious training of their child?
They do, but they also have the right to, if they so object, to a shared curriculum that is based on an entire community. They are welcome to homeschool their children or send them to a private school that completely meets with their own particular specifications.
Will the senator further yield?
Yes, I will.
Senator, do you believe that the parents have a right to review all instructional material intended in a classroom?
I think they could, sure, of course. If your child has an assignment and they bring it home, of course you can review it.
And that's letter B. There's 3 more. Do you believe that parents have a right to apply to enroll their child in a public school?
They do, but they do not, in my opinion, have the right to demand burdensome processes that will throw off the education for other children who should be just as valued by making unreasonable demands and putting into place statewide legislation that clearly will have a chilling effect on what teachers can and can't do and what should be taught and what shouldn't be taught.
Will the senator further yield?
Certainly.
Senator, do you believe that parents have a right to access and review all records relating to their minor
Yes,
child?
they should be able to do that.
Will the senator further yield?
Yes.
Do you believe that parents should have a right to access information regarding promotion and retention policies?
Senator, I think you're missing the point of my objection. It's
I was
not
just
so
asking a
much.
question.
It's not so much that I answered those. It's not so much that any one thing enumerated is necessarily a problem, although I think they bear worthy discussion. What's a problem is the massive surveillance effort and the distrust, the casting on, the mistrust, and the climate of censorship that this emboldens. That's the problem, Senator.
Will the senator further yield?
Certainly.
Senator, you said there's no one thing. You didn't tell me one thing that I mentioned that's in this bill that you had an issue with. When we talked about the records pertaining to the child and the things being taught in the classroom, you agreed with me that those things should be available and parents should have rights to them. I'm still just trying to understand, if you don't have issues with that, what you have issues with in this bill.
I think I explained already that I have issues with the administrative and burdensome process set up, the confusion created by the ability to even have a administrative process involving appeals, the atmosphere of censorship it creates, the division it causes between parents and teachers in already strapped and under-resourced schools. Those are my objections, Senator.
Senator, further yield.
Certainly.
It sounds like then that you think the parents should have this right, but have no ability to enforce it, which I don't think they would have a right if they can't enforce that right.
I don't think that, as I said in the beginning of my remarks, there are plenty of ways for parents already to be involved and invested in their kids' education, and it's worked quite well for many generations. And an enforcement mechanism, I think, is unnecessary, unneeded, and that the cons of setting such a thing into place vastly outweigh any pros that could be achieved.
Do you continue to yield, Senator?
Certainly.
Chair recognizes the Majority Whip with a question.
Thank you, Mr. President. With the Senator yield,
Of course.
you made a comment a moment ago that if a parent didn't like what was being taught in their child's classroom, they had basically two choices. They could homeschool their child or they could take them to a private school. Is that correct?
No, that's not what I said, Senator. What I said is there are many ways currently today to, if you don't like something, to influence that discussion, not least of which is running for school board or organizing to elect people that you think better represent your values. But no, I don't think that when we talk about public education, we are educating the broad community. And if that just doesn't work for someone or their family because their ideological or religious beliefs are extremely rigid and just don't fit in with what the broader community is doing, then they are free to not choose public school, which is actually something also mentioned in this bill.
Thank you. Will you further yield?
Certainly.
Most people can't afford a private school to send their child to, but isn't it true that over 50% of the state's budget that we work on every year dedicated to public education in Georgia?
I believe it is that much, 50%.
Thank you. And so isn't it further true that if we're going to spend 14, 15, 16 billion dollars of our state taxpayers' money for public education, should the parents not have a right to question where that money's being spent and also what their children are being exposed to in the classroom?
But Senator, see, they already have that right. And that's why we have democratically elected school boards. This legislation does nothing to advance any worthwhile conversation along those lines. Instead, it has all the cons that I've already described.
Have you been to a school board meeting in the last 2 or 3 years?
I have.
Did you get an opportunity to speak about these issues in that public meeting?
I didn't have any issues I was raising at that particular meeting.
Isn't it true that most of the time if you want to speak to a school board body that you have to sign up in advance and you're only given 1 minute or 2 minutes to speak?
That sounds a lot like how we do things down here.
Well, isn't it further true that the minority leaders ask about line 104 and that she and you object to allowing parents to have procedures on how they would question material that's taught in the classroom? Why would you object to that?
But see, again, Senator, you're missing the point. That's not really what this bill is about, and that's not really what it does. Those rights already exist. Those conversations already exist. Parents are free to run for school board. They're free to run someone against someone on the school board. They're free to knock on doors for someone if they don't like what they're doing. This bill does none of that. That already exists. This is just a piling on, a surveillance effort that disrespects teachers and drives a wedge and will cause confusion. That's all it does.
No more questions.
Do you continue to yield?
Certainly. I yield.
You got 13 minutes left.
Okay.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 26th with a question.
Isn't it true that these particular things are already in law? And that they can question the school board and have consultation with the teacher, all of that. But now, isn't it true that now we're talking about codifying it in state law? And then it's also true. This is about teaching history, what happened in this country. It has a history. Georgia has a history. And that's what it's all about. And, you know, we need to understand we are all here, in the truth, that we are all here as elected officials.
It's true.
But there were trials and tribulations for us to get here.
That's true.
And so, isn't it true, in order to take care of the educational system, when the history is taught, it's not taught on one side.
That's right.
It's taught on both sides.
I think that's important for young Georgians to know full and complete, accurate picture, Senator.
You have no more questions.
Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the well.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 28th to speak to the measure.
Thank you, Mr. President. Look, I'm going to break this down, and I'm probably going to oversimplify it. But it's interesting that I just heard something about this becoming a partisan issue. Because I don't understand how y'all can sit here and fight against the rights of parents. We talk about local control. There's nothing more local than the individual. There's nothing more local than the love between a mother and a child, a father and a child. That is as local as it gets. So this bill is not about local control. This bill is about control. We are simply returning control back to the parents, giving them the rights that have been lost in certain cases. That is what this bill is about. So we come down here and argue and make this a partisan issue. I don't know how you can go back in your districts and look parents in the face and say, I'm against you. How can you do that? Shame on you. I yield the well.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 29th.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to start out by thanking the senator from the 45th for bringing this legislation forward. I became a single father in 1999 and had custody of a son and daughter in elementary school. I was a full-time law enforcement officer, worked nights and days, worked weekends and holidays, and I had a good family that stood around me and supported me. But when it came to the education of my son and daughter, that was my responsibility. When it came to talking to my son and daughter, having that talk, it was my responsibility. When it came to talking about my children about faith, it was my responsibility. They can go into my house today, and I have a library of over 1,000 books, and it's everything from civil rights to civil wrongs, from one side to the other. There's everything in there from good crimes where people were trying to be the Robin Hood to horrendous crimes. There's all the classics in there, everything they want to read, because it was my responsibility as a father to help with my children's education. I also help with their education by paying my property taxes and by supporting schools and by showing up at basketball games and volleyball games and softball games to support my son and my daughter and their friends. And believe it or not, I spent the gruesome hours of going to Publix and buying cupcakes and taking them because I had no baking skills whatsoever, but my children wanted to be a part of the local school bake sale. At the beginning of every school year, I went to my children's individual teachers and I handed them self-addressed stamped envelopes to me so that every assignment given in class was also given to me. And not one teacher complained about having to fold a piece of paper, put it in an envelope, and drop it in a mailbox to make sure that Sarah and Seth's dad knew what was going on in the classroom. And when this bill first started being talked about in District 29, I had a lot of parents and probably 20 teachers contact me about it, or I ran into them and I asked them about it, and not one single complaint. There may be a group out there that represents teachers that's against this, but let me tell you what, they don't represent me, they don't represent my children, they don't represent the children of Georgia who have a right to learn. And my children learn about history. They learned about slavery. They learned about everything, and any shortcomings in that, they learned at home about it. Because I went to school in Harris County and I learned about it when I was in elementary school in Catawba, Georgia. So this is good legislation, and the most important part about it, and I echo what my friend from the 28th says, is it puts the responsibility back where it belongs, because the schools today are not the schools that my children graduated from. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the well.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 22nd, the minority whip, to speak to the measure.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll be brief. I rise in opposition to this bill just for various issues that I have, because I actually have serious questions. And I really mean that. I actually have serious questions about what certain things mean in it. And my colleagues have spoken to some other aspects of the bill that are problematic. But I want to look at some of these questions that I have, and also a couple of comments. Starting off by saying we do not have a civil rights statute in Georgia, which means really anything that anybody says as far as how the court's going to rule on a compelling state interest on a state law, they don't know the answer. We don't have a civil rights statute in Georgia. We don't have any laws from a state perspective that has to survive compelling interest and strict scrutiny. So this is really a first from a state's perspective. My first question is, on line 40, it says no state or local government entity, and it's not defined. Does that apply to us? Does that mean that every bill that we now make from this point forward must withstand strict scrutiny? Does it apply to our budgeting process? Because we define governing body. Governing body is your school board, so that's defined. But no state or local entity, I don't know if that means the state legislature now, for every legislative bill dealing with education that comes forward, has to pass strict scrutiny, because it clearly says that, and there's no definition in here to say it. And so that's just one major question. And I also want to leave you with, the legislature says what it means and means what it says. So you can go grab another statute and say, well, state government or local entity is defined this way, but the court's going to say, well, they didn't define it in the bill, and the clear language of the bill says state government or local entity. So the state government, meaning the Georgia General Assembly, now anything dealing with education must pass strict scrutiny. It must pass the compelling interest test. If it does, maybe it does. That's something we should be wrestling with publicly and understand that may be a road that we're actually going down. On the issue as far as dealing with sex education and dealing with the right to know, that's actually covered in federal law that already exists. Same thing with religion. So in some extent, you're just repeating that. It's not really necessary. But let's go even further. Because when you start talking about on line 87, line 87 talks about inalienable rights. It talks about inalienable rights. I don't even know what that means. What are inalienable rights? What are inalienable rights? How is that defined? So we're saying that we have these fundamental inalienable rights that parents have. We've never defined those before, and it becomes important in this sense. Who knows what that is? Now, what someone's going to say is, well, we fixed that because we say unless such rights have been waived or terminated as provided by law, parents have inalienable rights that are more comprehensive than those listed in paragraph 1. And so what you're going to say is, see, we've covered that because we said unless otherwise provided by law. But none of those laws you're going to cite and say, well, no, this doesn't apply. This is not an inalienable right. They've never passed a strict scrutiny test. So you're creating all these new rights. You don't even know what you're creating because you haven't defined what inalienable rights are. You haven't defined what these fundamental rights are. You try to get slick with it and say unless otherwise provided by law, but that doesn't work. It doesn't fit. Because no law you're going to present, no matter how you present it, has ever passed a strict scrutiny test. It just has not. So it doesn't matter that you go and say, well, no, a parent can't do this or a parent can't do that. You don't know that because it's never been subject to strict scrutiny. It's never been subject to a compelling interest test. And let's give an example. Let me give you a perfect example here. When you look at line 91, it says the governing body shall, in consultation with parents, teachers, administrators, develop and adopt a policy. Well, that sounds obvious. Well, which parents? Now, I know what you're going to say. PTA. That's reasonable, but does it withstand strict scrutiny? What if a parent doesn't want to join the PTA? They now have a fundamental right. You say a fundamental right that has to do strict scrutiny. And they say, you did not talk to me about this policy. And the school board would say, well, what we decided was we're going to go through the PTA. Based on what? I don't believe that may be rational, but it doesn't survive the compelling interest test. It doesn't survive strict scrutiny. So how do you determine that I must join the PTA so I can get consulted? And no one has the answer to that. Because any law or any board rule that you present and saying, well, everything has to go through the PTA, that's before you pass this test. That's before you pass this test. And all of that is going to come to fruition because you don't get to say, it would be similar to saying, strict scrutiny as far as race is concerned. You can't discriminate on the basis of race unless otherwise provided by law over here. It doesn't work that way. You can't say, okay, we can't discriminate on the basis of race. All laws must survive strict scrutiny. But if we got a law over here that was created before we created strict scrutiny, it trumps the strict scrutiny. That's not what happens. Every single law that's on the books right now has to survive strict scrutiny as far as education is concerned. That's what's going to come up. And you don't have any clue what may or may not come up. And I'm not saying I do, but I'm saying we're going down a path that we haven't really discussed yet. And I will tell you my last path that really is interesting, that I just find amazing, because we think we know what we're talking about. And I talked to the members of education and asked them, did this come up? Line 61 and line 111. They're similar, so I'll just kind of read it. The right to provide written notice that photographs or video or voice recordings of his or her child are not permitted, subject to applicable public safety and security exceptions. Those are the exceptions. Is there an athletic exception? So where if a person doesn't want their child to be videotaped and they play on the football team? You gonna make them? So you got the best athlete in football player, and his parent comes in and says, from now on, you're not videotaping my son. That's not happening. You think you're talking about it's on the bus. You think you're talking about something in a classroom, but that's not what this says. It says they can provide written notice that their kid cannot be videotaped. It doesn't provide an athletic exception. It provides a public safety exception. And now you're going to cite me and say something like, oh, well, they signed a waiver. I bet they did. But that waiver has never sustained strict scrutiny. Now what you're telling a parent is, oh, this little waiver that you signed to say that we can tape your son, and I don't even know if that even exists, that trumps your inalienable fundamental right. No court would rule that way. They would say you got to prove that this little waiver trumps their inalienable fundamental strict scrutiny right not to have their child videotaped on the football field. That is what you would have to show. Or you might say, well, other states have done this. They didn't have a problem. May not have, but that was before NIL. Now, I know NIL applies to colleges, but you think you got a parent to sit here and look at this and say, wait, all those high school games come on Georgia Public Broadcasting? All those games that come on, and my son is on there, and now I have an inalienable right to say I don't want him or her shown, and you give it no exceptions? Oh, we can make a deal, but it's going to cost. And no answer you give is satisfactory because no answer you give has withstood the strict scrutiny test. It's the highest test in the United States Constitution. So don't come quote the Georgia Athletic Association or any of that because it doesn't matter. It hasn't survived the strict scrutiny test. That's the bottom line. So no one knows the answer. I'm not saying I know the answer, but I am saying the clear language of this says that it applies to athletic events. That's the clear language. With that, Mr. President, I'll yield for any questions.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 10th with a question.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Yield?
Yes.
Senator, thank you for that lesson in the strict scrutiny test, by the way. I followed you quite well. But I want to direct your attention over to line 91. I think you referenced line 91 in your comments.
Yes.
But it talks about those governing bodies. It also mentions in that language that the governing body has to come up with a procedure. As a matter of fact, on the succeeding pages, it lists several procedures. My question for you is whether or not that information that you just shared will be impacted by your comments, and how would 180, possibly 181 school systems come up with a procedure, potentially, couldn't they all be different?
That's potentially correct. They all could actually be different, but that's when you start getting into those procedures has to withstand the highest test, quite frankly, because that's what a parent's going to say. Well, okay, y'all created these procedures. Forget just talking to me, but these procedures have to survive this particular test. And so it's going to be a lot of litigation that's going to be going forward too. But certainly it is difficult to make that uniform without a doubt.
Senator, further you?
Yes, sir.
Senator, why is it that you think the authors of this legislation did not define what those procedures should be? Is there a reason that that information may have been left off and in essence they punted the ball and deferred to the local governing entities?
I think that probably is what took place, but of course you'd have to ask the authors that, but I think that the more succinct answer would be certainly is a more of a punt than anything else, because it's difficult to do, quite frankly.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
You have no more questions.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 16th to speak to the measure.
Thank you, Mr. President. Appreciate it. Would like to speak in favor of the bill. I think what we've seen as we've watched the COVID issues and all the issues that have occurred with education, we've watched people being educated at home via online, and our parents have learned more about what their children are being taught than ever before. And that's caused part of the concerns of what we've seen. The things that I see is this, is number one, the children belong to their parents, and the parents have a right to know and to speak on those issues, and to be able to speak to the people that they ultimately pay with their tax dollars. That's the issue that we see. Parents pay for our schools. Now, many of the people in this chamber and other places choose to educate their children privately or homeschool them. And that is a double pay if you look at it. They pay for it and then don't use the facility because they chose not to. But the people we need to be with, the people we need to stand for, is the people who can't afford private education or cannot educate at home. They still should have a voice in the education of their children. And they're the ones who can least afford to do it, still need a voice. The people who can't pay still need to be heard. And this bill gives a parent, I believe, the voice that they need for their children. We need that voice to be heard. A school board needs to be accountable, but this is another way in which a parent can have a voice in what's going on in the education of their children, and those children belong to them, and they need that voice. And I believe this is all about freedom of speech for the voice of their children. Thank you.
Senator has yielded the well. The chair recognizes the senator from the 9th to speak to the measure.
Thank you, Mr. President. I fail to see the real purpose of this bill. It appears just a bill to create more chaos, confusion, and re-election political fodder. One of the issues, well, let me back up. We've already said this many times, there is already a process for parents to review curriculum and materials. I know in Gwinnett County, we have curriculum review, and it is made up of parents and teachers, those from the community. I know because I've been on it. I've watched I looked through all the bills. You can read them all, give your comment. It is publicly put out there. There's also AKS review. Again, parents, teachers have that opportunity to give their input and review any material. So there is already a process set. And I keep asking the question, who's been denying these parents information that they're requesting so far? Has there been complaints? Or are school boards not, our teachers not giving this information already? Again, we already have a process. And then two, and this has been mentioned, is the burden of actually initiating initiating these rights. We're asking governing bodies to take time to write some policy and implement these resources, but when are they going to have the time to do this? What's it gonna cost? Do we even know how much this will cost for the time that's going to be spent to implement these rights? What will it cost our local governing bodies? And at a time where we already have a shortage of labor, shortage of good teachers. But how much would this cost? How much will it cost taxpayers? Have we ever thought about that? Because it has to come from somewhere. Line 91 and 95. Well, I'm gonna live with 95. Such policy and regulations shall include procedures. So the state is presenting this bill, but we're punting writing the procedure to our local bodies. Why is it the state writing those procedures? From line 96, 97 through 111, procedures are listed here, just the word procedures, many times. What are those procedures? Why hasn't the state laid out those procedures, and why are we asking our local governing bodies to lay that out for us? It seems like we wanted a complete bill to target what you're asking. We would have those procedures here in the state written. The other thing I want to point out is this doesn't apply to private schools. Don't private schools receive some public funding? So if it's good for our public schools, why is it not good for our private schools? All of you have gotten up here and say, oh, parents have rights. Yeah, I realize that. My kids came out of the public schools as well. We do have rights. But we shouldn't just be targeting public schools. Let's make it for everyone. So I don't know why this wouldn't include private schools as well. And, I'm going to go back to the procedures for a minute. Procedures for a parent to learn about his or her minor child's courses of study. No procedure listed. Procedures for a parent to object to instructional materials intended for use. No detailed procedures. Procedures for a parent to provide a written notice and photograph or video. No detailed procedure. So that's just a few of the issues I have with the bill. Among the very basic thing is just going to boggle down our educational process when we should be using our time, resources, and money to make the job easier for our educators. The money spent coming up with the policies and rules that we're asking our local governing bodies to do, we could be using that money in our public schools to make them better, to make sure our kids get what they need. Any questions?
Do you yield?
Yes.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 10th with a question.
Thank you, Mr. President. Would the senator yield?
Yes.
Senator, isn't it true that this bill simply creates chaos and confusion for our governing bodies, potential 181 school systems?
That is correct.
Senator, further yield?
Yes.
Senator, is there a role defined in here anywhere for our state school superintendent?
I didn't see any role for our state superintendent, and I would think that this would fall under the purview of the state superintendent.
So given that there is no role in here for the state school superintendent, wouldn't this potential legislation create a lot of conflicts with our state, the highest ranking school official in the state in terms of their policies and procedures?
I would agree with the senator, yes.
Senator, further yield?
Yes.
the author of this legislation talked about rights and procedure. Isn't there a difference between a right and a procedure?
That is correct.
And in fact, as you've already so stated, those procedures were not and have not been defined. Isn't that correct?
I have not seen those procedures defined in this bill.
Thank you, Senator.
I yield the well.
Senator has yielded the well. The chair recognizes the senator from the 35th to speak to the measure.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senators, does everything have to be partisan that we vote on? Everything should not be partisan. I learned that a long time ago, that education, yes, always has been the #1 budget item. Yes, even when I was a kid. My parents have been teachers, principals. They went on to the area office, both. They worked over 40 years in Atlanta Public Schools, both of them. I worked for 11 years in Atlanta Public Schools. And parents are definitely the first teachers. They learn so much at home before and including their values, their morals, when they're at home. And private school budgets have always been there, and you had a choice to either go to public school or find the money or a scholarship to go to private schools. But now we have home study. So they have home study even in public school, or you can be a home, you can do it, you can teach your children at home. So that's available now. Also, same thing that was 20, 30 years ago is still in place, and that is the teachers have a lesson plan, and they send it home. They invite the parents, and the parents sign off on it. That's still, and if you don't want your child to take, say, sex education or whatever, you can sign off on your child doing that. So parents can now say whether or not things happen, even in the schools. Many of you have gone to the schools now and read to the children, the kindergartners and all. But the parents can say, if you take a picture, I don't want my child in the picture. So the parents and the principals already observed that particular request of the parents. This legislation would require the creation of procedures where a parent may object to instructional materials intended for use in the classroom. That's already done when you approve the lesson plan. You still also go into, you're invited to sit with the teacher every year. So you're invited, and so any parent that goes there can talk to the teacher. Also, the parents still, I was PTA president at 4 different schools when my 2 boys were growing up. And I know that not only at the schools that I work with, that a teacher, a parent, can have a say-so. I made sure that if you had a problem with the teacher, that you could go into the classroom and sit there, or let the grandparent or someone you choose, you let the principal know. And sometimes the teachers didn't already know, so it could be a surprise visit to them. So you could see if what the child is saying or what problems you have with it, what's really going on. This is still happening too, by request. This legislation would direct the upbringing and the moral or religious training of their child. And that's already done, because you're the first teacher. The parents are the first teachers. And they do that, and they can select what courses that they don't want their child in. And it's respected by all public schools in the Atlanta area. I can tell you that from experience, And from as a child, my parents were the old kind of teachers and principals. They would bring some of the kids home who needed extra help or just some attention or love. They would bring them home with us. We had to give them our toys, our old clothes, everything, our favorite whatever, and food. And that's the kind of teachers they were back in the day. They don't have that anymore. But also, a review of all instructional materials intended for use in the classroom is what this legislation is asking for. Again, that's already done. Also, enroll your child in a public school, private school, or home study program. That's already being done. You can do that. If my parents wanted me, or if I wanted my kids to go to a private school, I'd have to come up with the money to do that. Now you don't even have to do it. You can have home study. And you can register to do that as long as you, and some churches allow those same students to come there on like a week or different days. So if you home studied in your different areas, you could even create that. So that's being done already. Also, review all records related to your child. That's already available. Let's not make this, please, a partisan issue. Please look at this legislation clearly. And why are we being frivolous by putting legislation in that will cost money that does not even exist? Also, this asks, and this is my last point, consent in writing before a photograph, video, voice recording of your child. And if it's unnecessary unless it's necessary for safety and security, that's already done. So I have to be against this legislation because I'm fiscally responsible for what happens in my area. So I cannot stand and say, let us spend millions of dollars to put procedures in place for something that we don't need. Also, I love the kids and my children. I call all of them my children. So let's continue to support the education, the mind education and academic education of our children. If there are no questions, I'll yield the floor. Thank you, Mr. President.
You have no questions. The chair recognizes the senator from the 45th to close debate on the measure.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. President. Senate colleagues, this bill is very simple. It's a transparency bill. It does not create confusion or any issues that were spoke about from folks from the other side of the aisle. It simply defines the role of parents and teachers. Simple bill, transparency bill. Also would like to add that the State School Board Association supports this bill. And in closing, this is very simple. If you want to vote against this Bill of Rights, go ahead. I will be on the right side of history by supporting the parents' rights in Georgia. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the will.
Senator has closed debate. The question is on the adoption of the committee substitute. Is there objection to adoption of the committee substitute? Chair hears none, and the committee substitute is adopted. Is there objection to agreeing to the report of the committee which is favorable to the passage of the bill? The chair hears none. The report of the committee is agreed to. Is there objection to the main question being ordered? The chair hears none, and the main question is ordered. Questions on the passage of the bill by substitute. All those in favor vote yea. Opposed, nay. The secretary will unlock the machine. For what purpose does the senator from the 36th rise?
Parliamentary inquiry.
State your inquiry.
isn't it true that it's my understanding that the Georgia School Board Association actually raised several points of contention that they did not agree with in the bill as it was presented to committee?
I'm sure
Is
each
that
and
not
every
true?
member can decide that on their own.
Thank you.
For what purpose does the senator from the 45th rise?
Isn't it true, Mr. President, that we address those concerns through a committee substitute?
Once again, I'm certain each and every member is capable of finding that out. Thank you. On the passage of the bill, the yeas are 33, the nays are 21. This bill, having received the requisite constitutional majority, is therefore passed by substitute. For what purpose does the senator from the 19th rise?
Mr. President, pursuant to Senate Rule 7-1.10b, I give notice at the appropriate time that I intend to move the Senate to consider action by the House on Senate Bill 391.
Mr. Secretary, can you please read the caption of Senate Bill 391?
Senate Bill 391 by Senator Tillery of the 19th. A bill to be entitled an act to amend an act creating the Board of Commissioners of Jeff Davis County, approved March 25th, 1958, as amended, particularly by an act approved April 4th, 2012, so as to change the description of the commissioner districts to provide for definitions and inclusions and for other purposes.
That's good.
That completes the order, Mr. President.
Senator, the chair will inform you that the appropriate time to make that motion will be tomorrow. Thank you for serving notice. Mr. Secretary, can you please read the caption of Senate Bill 469?
Senate Bill number 469 by Senator Harper of the 7th and others. A bill to be entitled an act to amend Article 1 of Chapter 7 of Title 52 of the Official Code of Georgia annotated relating to general provisions of registration, operation, and sale of watercraft so as to require certain watercraft to have a day and night visual distress signals on board when on the coastal waters of Georgia and for other purposes. Mr. President, the Senate Committee on Natural Resources and the Environment recommends that this bill do pass by substitute. Respectfully submitted, Senator Harper of the 7th District Chairman. Mr. President, the Senate Committee on Natural Resources and the Environment offers the following substitute to Senate Bill 469. A bill to be entitled an act to amend Article 1 of Chapter 7 of Title 52 of the Official Code of Georgia annotated relating to general provisions of registration, operation, and sale of watercraft so as to require certain watercraft to have day and night visual distress signals on board when on the coastal waters of Georgia and for other purposes. Amendment 1, submitted by Senator Harrell of the 40th, offers the following amendment. Amend the substitute to Senate Bill 469 by inserting after watercraft on line 5 the following. To extend the length of a non-motorized boat may measure to be exempt from numbering and for other purposes. Amendment 1A, submitted by Senator Harrell of the 40th and others. By striking on line 10, 26, and inserting in lieu thereof 21. And that completes the order, Mr. President.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 7th to present Senate Bill 469.
Thank you, Mr. President. Ladies and gentlemen of the Senate, Senate Bill 469 simply aligns Georgia law with federal law in relation to boats in coastal waters and the provisions that they have to have in relation to visual distress signals. It lays that out in the legislation. It also aligns state law in regards to federal law and U.S. Coast Guard regulation when it comes to personal flotation devices. That's what the bill does, Mr. President. I'd be happy to answer any questions. If there are none, I will yield the will.
You have a question. Chair recognizes the senator from the 26th.
Senator Yale.
I will.
Am I right in that if it's 26 feet or whatsoever?
Well, I think you may be talking to the amendment. I'm going to let the senator from the 40th address her amendment.
Could the senator tell me what the amendment will do?
I think the senator from the 40th will address that amendment whenever she comes to the well.
Senator Yield. Again.
I yield.
Are the numbers being removed from on the side of the vessel?
If again, you're talking to the amendment, and the senator from the 40th is bringing the amendment, but to your question, yes, if we change the law, there will be numbers removed from sides of boats. That is correct.
Senator Yield again.
I yield.
Isn't it true that the numbers basically tell whether or not the boat is registered?
That is.
Game and Fish can look at it and run it to make sure it's not a stolen vessel?
You are correct. To the senator from the 26th, and I believe Georgia is actually the #1 state when it comes to stolen vessels and boating. I just learned that a few minutes ago from my good friend over here.
You have no more questions.
Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the well.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 40th to present amendments 1 and 1A.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise to explain Amendment 1 and 1A to Senate Bill 469. The amendment simply has to do with unmotorized sailboats. For those of you who know me, you know I go out rock climbing a lot. When I'm not climbing on the rocks, you'll find me on a lake in a sailboat. Current law requires that sailboats, unmotored sailboats, be registered with the state if they are over 12 feet. But from my experience sailing, 12 feet is a rather arbitrary number because you've got a lot of small sailboats that are maybe fleets of sailing clubs or kids' summer camps that are a little larger than that, say from 12 to 21 feet. And so all this does is says that if a sailboat is 21 feet or under and unmotorized, those sailboats do not have to be registered with the state. So this is to simplify and to remove the burden on these small sailboats, like your kids might learn how to sail when they go to summer camp. I'll yield for questions if there are any.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 19th with a question.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Yield.
Sure.
Senator, I'm just trying to make sure I understand this bill. This bill, your amendment, makes the bill shorter, correct? Or the boat shorter?
It allows for slightly longer boats to not have to go through the registration process.
Did the senator from the 7th ask you to carry this amendment?
No, actually, my husband did.
Thank you.
Chair recognizes the pro tem for a question. He's got a laugh going, so I'm worried about this question.
Very amused by the senator from the 19th line of questioning there regarding the sponsor of the bill. Senator, isn't it true that Georgia's #1 state for stolen boats historically over the last decade or so, and that we introduced legislation 3 years ago to provide for numbers to go on the boats?
If the gentleman so says.
Yes, ma'am. And then, if Georgia's the #1 state for stolen boats, and you're saying these boats, and we are saying these boats are small, couldn't these boats be loaded on the roof of a car or the back of a truck and just hauled off and sold elsewhere?
I would venture to say that these small sailboats are not the boats that are being targeted to be stolen. They have no motors, and they don't have that much value to very many people.
So if they don't have a number, they can't be traced, though. Wouldn't that be true?
It would probably make it a little bit harder to be traced. But in my time of sailing, and I've been sailing for decades now, I've never known a small sailboat to be stolen.
As have I, and I've seen literally hundreds of them stolen on Lake Lanier. And when a storm comes up, it isn't also true that if your sailboat, you're talking about a small skiff, it's towable, you can carry it to the water, and it blows off the dock and it's not numbered, there's no way to find, for the rightful owner to find the boat, correct?
These sailboats are usually stored on trailers on the land,
Okay, but
not stored on docks.
Okay, but if they were stored on docks or trailers or wherever, there was no way to identify this boat.
True, but if a boat is properly stored on a trailer, then I don't think it's going to get lost in the water.
Senator, how many boats were stolen in Georgia last year?
I do not know.
Where does Georgia rank for stolen boats in the country?
Well, you're saying that Georgia is #1 state, but what I'm saying is that I would like to see that data broken down by the type of boat, because I would be shocked if these small sailing boats that are usually part of a kid's summer camp are boats that are being targeted to be stolen. I would guess that motorized boats would be targeted for being stolen simply because the motor has value.
The motor also has a vehicle identification number as well. How many boats are there? How many sailboats are in Georgia under 26 feet?
DNR, I just met with them in the hallway, which is why I negotiated the number down from 26 to 21. They said the number is 1,200, so it's a relatively small number of boats that are being registered in this size.
Thank you, Senator. I'm afraid that, in my opinion, your amendment makes the boat easier to be stolen and harder to trace. Thank you.
Do you continue to yield?
I do.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 28th with a question.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Yield,
I do.
do you own a sailboat?
I do.
How long is your sailboat?
Oh, let's see. I'd have to count the sailboats, because every time I go out of town, my husband buys a new sailboat. It's kind of a bad habit of his. I believe we have a couple of 20-foot boats and one that might be in the 12 to 14-foot range.
Do you have any in the 21 to 25-foot range?
We have 2 racing boats. Now, you might notice that in the current law, racing boats are already exempt from registration. And my boats are racing boats, and so they probably would already be exempt.
Thank you.
You have no more questions.
Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the well.
Does any other senator wish to speak for or against Senate Bill 469 or the amendments? The chair sees none. Senator from the 7th has waived closing debate. All right, we're going to take up the First Amendment here. Amendment 1A. Is there objection to adoption of Amendment 1A? There is objection. All those in favor of the adoption of Amendment 1A, vote yea. Opposed, nay. The Secretary will unlock the machine. For what purpose does the senator from the 40th rise?
Isn't it true that the chairman of the Natural Resources Committee has not objected to this amendment?
I'm sure each and every member can find him on the floor and ask him that question. On the adoption of Amendment 1A, the yeas are 24, the nays are 29, and the amendment is lost. Now we'll take up Amendment number 1. Is there objection to adoption of Amendment number 1? There is objection. All those in favor of adoption of Amendment number 1, vote yea. Opposed, nay. The Secretary will unlock the machine. For what purpose does the senator from the... Oh, she waves. What purpose does the senator from the 40th rise?
Isn't it true that the DNR also does not object to this amendment?
I'll have to assume that each and every member is capable of figuring that out on their own. On the adoption of amendment number 1, the yeas are 21, the nays are 32, and amendment number 1 is lost. All right, now we're going to take up the measure. Question is on the adoption of the committee substitute. Is there objection to adoption of the committee substitute? The chair hears none, and the committee substitute is adopted. Is there objection to agreeing to the report of the committee which is favorable to the passage of the bill? The chair hears none, the report of the committee is agreed to. Is there objection to the main question being ordered? The chair hears none, the main question is ordered. The questions on the passage of the bill by substitute. All those in favor vote yea, opposed nay. The secretary will unlock the machine. On the passage of the bill, the yeas are 55, the nays are 0. This bill, having received the requisite constitutional majority, is therefore passed by substitute. Mr. Secretary, can you please read the caption of Senate Bill 395? 395.
Senate Resolution number 395 by Senator Watson of the 1st and others. A resolution recognizing February 2022 as Self-Care Awareness Month and for other purposes. Mr. President, the Senate Committee on Rules recommends that this resolution do pass. Respectfully submitted, Senator Mullis of the 53rd Chairman. That completes the order, Mr. President.
For what purpose does the senator from the 53rd rise?
Mr. President, I have a motion. I move with trials and tribulation, with personal anguish, with respect to the time in this chamber with all the debate we've had, that's the Senate table, Senate Resolution 395.
The senator from the 53rd has very audaciously moved at the Senate table, Senate Resolution 395. Is there objection? The chair hears none, and it is placed on the table. Mr. Secretary, can you please read the caption of House Bill 840?
House Bill number 840 by Representatives Carson of the 46th and others. A bill to be entitled an act to incorporate the city of Vinings, to provide a charter, to provide for penalties, to provide for definitions and construction, to provide for other matters relative to the foregoing, to provide for a referendum, to provide for effective dates and transitional provisions governing the transfer of various functions and responsibilities from Cobb County to the city of Vinings and for other purposes. Mr. President, the Committee of the House on Information and Audits has examined from within the finds properly and gross. Respectfully submitted, Senator Anderson of the 24th District Chairman. That completes the order, Mr. President.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 32nd to present House Bill 840.
Thank you, Mr. President. This bill calls for a referendum on whether to officially create the city of Vinings. The Vinings community has existed since the 1830s, and it was based around a railroad stop originally called Vinings Station. The community is centered around the intersection of Paces Ferry and Paces Mill Road. The proposed city map follows major highways and includes only about 7,000 people. The Vinings vision map looks very similar from 10 years ago, and you've got the current proposed map on your desk. The feasibility study for the city of Vinings was favorable, and the only services contemplated are planning and zoning, code enforcement, and parks and recreation. Governance is a city manager with mayor and 4 council members elected at large with staggered terms after the initial election. This small community is already thought to be a city by most people in the area. There's overwhelming support for this in the community, and passage of this bill would allow the people of this historic community to vote on whether to officially become a city. This has been thoroughly vetted in committee, and I would ask for favorable consideration. We'll yield the well and come back and close if needed.
You have questions.
I'm yielding the well. I'll come back and close.
Senator has yielded the well. Does any other senator wish to speak for or against the measure? For what purpose does the senator from the 10th rise? He waves. For what purpose does the senator from the 26th rise?
Mr. President, parliamentary inquiry.
State your inquiry.
What kind of figures does that, by creating a city within Cobb County, I believe that's where Vining is, the debt service that the county has on that particular area as far as parks, recreation, I would assume they sold some bonds. Then when a city is created, they also apply for community development money that necessarily would go to the county. So isn't it true that creating this city will somehow hamper Cobb County on its financial responsibility on bonds that they might have sold to create parks and those kind of things within Vining?
The chair is not privy to that information, but would direct you to the author of the legislation. The senator from the 32nd is carrying that bill. Any other senators wish to speak for or against? The chair sees none. Is there objection to agreeing to the report of the committee which is favorable to the passage of the bill? The chair hears none. The report of the committee is agreed to. Is there objection to the main question being ordered? The chair hears none, and the main question is ordered. Questions on the passage of the bill? All those in favor vote yea. Opposed, nay. The secretary will unlock the machine. On the passage of the bill, the yeas are 33, the nays are 19. This bill, having received the requisite constitutional majority, is therefore passed. For what purpose does the senator from the 32nd rise?
Mr. President, I move that the Senate immediately transmit House Bill 840 to the House.
Senator from the 32nd has moved that the Senate immediately transmit House Bill 840, which we just passed, to the House. Is there objection? There is objection. All those in favor of immediately transmitting, vote yea. Opposed, nay. The secretary will unlock the machine. On the motion to immediately transmit House Bill 840 to the House, the yeas are 32, the nays are 18, and it did not meet the required 2/3, and so it does not immediately transmit. It will proceed over to the House tomorrow. Chair recognizes the Majority Leader for a we have more business. Chair recognizes the senator from the 50th.
Mr. President, pursuant to Senate Rule 7-1.10B, I give notice that at the appropriate time, I intend to move that the Senate consider House action on House Bill 218.
Mr. Secretary, can you please read the caption of House Bill 218?
House Bill number 218 by Representatives Bellinger of the 23rd and others. A bill to be entitled an act to amend Code Section 16-11-126 of the Official Code of Georgia annotated relating to having or carrying handguns, long guns, or other weapons, license requirements and exceptions for home, motor vehicles, private property, and for other purposes. That completes the order, Mr. President.
Notice has been received, and House Bill 218 will be moved on the next legislative day, which is Thursday. Chair recognizes the senator from the 56th.
Thank you, Mr. President. Pursuant to Senate Rule 7-1.10b, I give notice at the appropriate time. I intend to move the Senate to consider an action by the House for Senate Bill 437.
Ms. Secretary, can you please read the caption of Senate Bill 437?
Senate Bill number 437 by Senators Albert of the 56th and others. A bill to be entitled an act to amend an act creating the Board of Commissioners of Fulton County and for other purposes. That completes the order, Mr. President.
Notice has been served that the Senate will consider Senate Bill 437 on the next legislative day. Chair recognizes the senator from the 23rd.
Thank you, Mr. President. Pursuant to Senate Rule 7-1.10b, I give notice that at the appropriate time I intend to move the Senate consider House action on Senate Bill 446.
Ms. Secretary, can you please read the caption of Senate Bill 446?
Senate Bill number 446 by Senator Burns of the 23rd and others. A bill to be entitled an act to amend an act reconstituting the Board of Education of Warren County and for other purposes. That completes the order, Mr. President.
Notice has been served, and our chamber will consider this action on the next legislative day. For what purpose does the senator from the 37th rise?
Mr. President, pursuant to Senate Rule 7-1.10b, I give notice that at the appropriate time I intend to move that the Senate consider House action on Senate Bill 120.
Ms. Secretary, can you please read the caption of Senate Bill 120?
Senate Bill number 120 by Senators Tippins of the 37th and others. A bill to be entitled an act to amend Article 3 of Chapter 18 of Title 15 of the Official Code of Georgia annotated relating to Solicitors General of States Courts so as to provide for the honorary office of Solicitor General Emeritus, to provide for qualifications and for other purposes. That completes the order, Mr. President.
Notice has been served, and Senate Bill 120 will be considered on the next legislative day. For what purpose does the senator from the 6th rise?
Parliamentary inquiry.
State your inquiry.
With respect to if another senator has moved with respect to a bill to give notice that there's going to be action, if I wanted to do the same thing with respect to the same bill, do we have to have two notices, or is one appropriate?
Secretary indicates just one suffices. Ms. Secretary, will you first read several House bills and resolutions that have been received?
Mr. President, the following message was received from the House through Mr. Riley, the clerk thereof. Mr. President, the House has passed by the requisite constitutional majority the following bills of the House. House Bill 1340 by Representative Werkheiser of the 157th, a bill to be entitled an act to amend an act to provide a new charter for the city of Glenville.
State and local government.
House Bill 1341 by Representative Camp of the 131st, a bill to be entitled an act to amend an act providing for the election of the members of the Board of Education of Pike County. Approved.
State and local government.
House Bill 1367 by Representative Tarbin of the 2nd and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend an act providing for the election of the members of the Board of Education of Walker County.
State and local government.
House Bill 1368 by Representatives Dukes of the 154th, a bill to be entitled an act to provide for a Board of Education for elections and registration for Miller County.
State and local government.
House Bill 1370 by Representatives Williams of the 168th and others, a bill to be entitled an act to authorize the governing authority of Liberty County to levy an excise tax pursuant to subsection
State and
B.
local government.
That completes the order, Mr. President. Mr. President, the following message was received from the House through Mr. Riley, the clerk thereof. Mr. President, the House has passed by the requisite constitutional majority the following bill of the House. House Bill 1361 by Representative Leverett of the 33rd, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Title IX of the Official Code of Georgia annotated relating to civil practice so as to clarify that the Attorney General is to be served and heard in defense of all
Judiciary.
acts. That completes the order, Mr. President.
The chair recognizes the majority leader for a motion.
Mr. President, I move that the Senate stand adjourned until 10 a.m. on Thursday, 24 February 2022.
Mr. Secretary, do you have any announcements?
Mr. President, the Rules Committee will meet upon adjournment today in room 450 in the Capitol. The Higher Education Committee will also meet today in room 450 from 1 p.m. to 2 p.m. The Health and Human Services Committee will meet in room 450 in the Capitol from 2 p.m. The Regulated Industries and Utilities Committee will also meet from room 450 in the Capitol from 3 p.m. And the Judiciary Committee will meet in room 307 of the Coverdale Building from 4 p.m. That completes the order, Mr. President.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 40th for an announcement.
Thank you, Mr. President. Women who have paid their dues for the Women's Caucus, make sure you stop by room 216 in the Capitol and pick up your lunch. There's about 15 minutes of the program left if you'd like to catch that on Zoom. Thank you.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 37th for an announcement from his desk.
Mr. President, we have higher ed today. It's advertised at 1. It will be upon adjournment of rules. It's in the same room. We have a relatively short calendar, so we should be in good shape.
Just to confirm, Higher Ed Committee will meet upon adjournment of rules in the same room.
That's correct.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 43rd for an announcement. Senator from the 43rd have an announcement.
Oh, I'm sorry. I have so many friends I'm distracted. Can I just do it from a...
Chair recognizes the senator from the 43rd from her desk.
Go to the well. See? No. You said from my desk. Thank you, Mr. President. All my friends are talking to me, and I got distracted. But I want to remind those members of the Georgia Legislative Black Caucus who are dues-paying members that our annual Heritage Dinner is tomorrow night at 6 p.m. at the College Football Hall of Fame. Thank you.
Thank you. Glad you could find a microphone. Chair recognizes the Minority Whip to introduce to us our Doctor of the Day.
Thank you, Mr. President. Our Doctor of the Day is Dr. Douglas Miller. Dr. Douglas Miller is an expert cardiologist and academic health leader. He has been recognized as a Castle Connolly top doctor for over 20 consecutive years. He has uniquely served as the dean of 3 research intensive medical schools in the U.S., including our very own Medical College of Georgia. He is a member of 2 national medical doctor programs, accrediting bodies. He also instituted a new and innovative curriculum that helps to assure the best physician career paths and the right workforce for Georgia's underserved communities. He has advised several global health policy and technology business organizations. Dr. Miller holds U.S. patents in the fields of new drug development, advanced medical imaging, and artificial intelligence. His global biotech incubator experience, lectures, and podcasts reflects his leading authority status on advanced technology applications in both healthcare and human learning. Our Doctor of the Day, Dr. Douglas Miller. Thank you, Mr. President.
The majority leader has moved that this body stand adjourned until 10 a.m. on Thursday, February 24th, 2022. All those in favor of that very important motion signify by saying aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. The Senate stands adjourned.